And we're live. Greetings. I'm Salvador Cordova, and welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel, where we explore evidences for the Christian faith and especially targeted evidences to the graduate science students, Christians, and creationists who are science students in the universities, and also professional researchers. We live in a troubled world, and the need for a savior is more more acute now than at any other time that I know of in history. In the era of nuclear weapons, nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons, and just environmental troubles, and who knows what else. It's been speculated that the human race can't last long, and much as I would have hoped that we would have figured out our problems, the problem fundamentally, I think, is not the lack of technology. It is the inability to stop tyrants. We can see the effect of one tyrannical leader in the Soviet Union, Russia, the former Soviet Union, his impact on the world in bringing us closer and closer to nuclear war. As nuclear proliferation increases, it only takes one nut job like Kim Jong-un in North Korea to make the world a miserable place. Jesus said that there would be wars and rumors of wars, famines and pestilences, earthquakes, troubles in the seas, disturbances in the heavens. Many of those prophecies seem to be coming true. And much as I would like to hope the judgment day is deferred, especially since I'm a classical millennialist, not a pre-trib rapturist, just so you know where my biases are. I am concerned many Christians will suffer all of these disasters as well as persecution. I do not believe, I'd like to hope that I'm wrong, okay? I hope that I'm wrong, but I don't believe that the Christian world will be raptured out of the present troubles. They'll be right there to suffer with everyone else, sad to say. I mean, it really is. Greetings, Bent. And, oh my goodness. All right. Since you're here, Bent, if you'd like to join the stream, I can send you an email. So let me tell you what's going on. We had previously expected that John B., a geochemist, would join us. About half an hour before the show began, he told me that he was ill and couldn't attend. And I know that he prepared materials. I sympathize deeply with that because I myself was very sick most of today because I got a shingles vaccine the second round, and I knew that could really wipe me out, and I was bedridden the whole day. So John, I wish you a very good recovery. He was very kind to come here last week, and I think the body gave out. In fact, under great physical duress, he came here last week after being on the other side of the world and suffering all sorts of jet lag and having all sorts of, I mean, I know how hard it is to travel, and he took time to be here, so I know that he must be pretty sick tonight. So he's very gracious to come on last week despite physical difficulty and lack of sleep. I commend him for that. So the fact he couldn't come tonight, I do respect that. And I myself wasn't 100% sure I could even be here because I was wiped out. That shingles vaccine is kind of, it's kind of potent. And the good news is I won't have to have another one. They said that's immunization for life. And I'm grateful for that. So I'm going to go pretty much off script today. I'm going to, just in the remote chance Bent wants to just join for a few minutes, I'm going to send him an email right now. So just give me a moment. It's really hard to do this when I have to kind of run all the controls, run the shows, and send an email. I'm not good at multitasking as other people um, can be. I'm just really not that. I'm not wired that way. So if you give me a moment, I'm going to try. So Bent, I'm sending you an email right now. Bent, if you just want to join a couple minutes, I know this was just so much on the fly, as this whole show is. I'm sorry to start the show on a somber note, but that's what's really at stake here. You know, I think each and every one of us wants to live happily ever after. That's really deeply ingrained in us. And I believe that, oh, great. He said he'll check in a few. And we don't want to hear that the world is going to pot, but this is something the Lord prophesied. And on many levels, the extinction of the human race seems inevitable. First off, the universe is going to expire and die out. Long before that, the solar system will probably be in great trouble, and the Earth, habitable Earth, will be gone. But even in a more immediate concern, and despite all the criticisms on the internet against my colleague and friend John Sanford, and he was also my former boss for 7 years, the human genome is deteriorating, and it's not just creationists are saying that. Here's a secular book by Brian Sykes, Adam's Curse. He's an Oxford geneticist. He's predicting the decline of the human race. I don't know of any major geneticist that thinks on a functional level that our genomes are improving. In fact, there are studies that our intelligence is declining. There's an increase in mental health problems, etc. I talked to an epidemiologist at a conference, the ENCODE 2015 Users Conference 7 years ago. She said she can't explain why there's an early onset of cancers now, juvenile cancers. There will be, this is a testable hypothesis. The genetic entropy hypothesis says that we should expect increases in birth defects that are not that are numerically not reversible. There'll be more and more with each generation. That is a testable hypothesis of creationist theory. So when I nearly left the Christian faith some years ago, ironically, it was a study of Bertrand Russell's works that persuaded me that it's better to return to the Christian faith. Even if I don't have as many facts in hand as I would like, I at least had some. And that was enough to give me enough hope to go back. And some people will say, don't you want to have faith without don't you want to build your faith on evidence? It's like, well, okay, we rarely have as many facts in hand as we would like to make decisions. Many times we have to make assumptions based on at least some facts. And 20 years ago, I said, I think we have at least some facts, maybe not as many as we would like, but enough that I felt I could move forward and live my life out as if the Christian faith were true. So, like a lot of decisions, we'll go with the data we have in hand and just go with it because we don't have anything. Sometimes we don't have anything better. And the alternative is to look at our own lives as meaningless and pointless and in vain, as it says in 1 Corinthians 15. If the dead are not raised, if Christ is not raised, then our faith is in vain. Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. So for those of you who are joining us today, we're going to go off script. My friend and colleague, John B., he was going to give a talk. Half an hour before the show began, he told me he was ill. And I know he must be really ill because last week he was under a lot of physical duress, lacking sleep, being tired. He still showed up on my show. And also myself, I was ill the whole day because I'm recovering from a shingles vaccine that was hopefully it's the second round and hopefully the last round for myself. So John B, we're all wishing you well. So in his absence, I decided to continue to defend why I'm a young Earth creationist. For those of you who are not as familiar with my channel, I have 5 science degrees, one in applied physics from Johns Hopkins University, and another master's equivalent in biology. So you'll hear me represent myself as an independent molecular biophysics researcher. That's because both my disciplines are, I'm not very good at either, but I'm spread out in biology and physics. But physics is more my interest. Sal got a shingles vaccine. I didn't come down with shingles, but the vaccine has had a history of wiping people out. It's pretty potent. When my mother took it, she was sick for 1 week for each round. And so that's kind of the state of affairs. So again, guys, we're going off script tonight. And I'm just going to continue on with my defense of young Earth creationism. I will say this, that, you know, in regards to defending creationist theory, and let me see if I could show a graph here. Oh my goodness, BENT Hovind is here.
Pardon me. Hello.
BENT! Oh my goodness.
Hi, everybody. It's me,
Hi.
BENT. I'm drinking water, and it has store brand flavors, grape and lemonade put together. It's
So
good.
BENT is a Christian brother. Why don't you introduce yourself and your affiliation with Dapper Dino's channel?
I'm BENT. I'm a Christian brother. I am affiliated with Dapper Dino, in that I'm on his show Kent with BENT many Tuesdays, not every Tuesday like it used to be. And it's where we go over Kent Hovind and his presentations and all that, and we try our best to correct his mistakes and what I now believe are his lies. And I'm not okay with people lying for Jesus, because when people find out it's a lie, they have no reason to believe anything else you've ever said, ever. And they have a lot of reason to doubt everything you've said about Jesus.
Amen.
Don't do that to people. Tell the truth. It's not up to you to save them. It's up to you to tell them the truth and for Jesus to work in their hearts or not. It's not your choice, okay? You're commanded to love your neighbor as yourself. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And if you can, strongly suggested, if not commanded, to love your enemies. That's my hardest part, or the hardest part for me, because it's not easy to do that, but it's what we're commanded to do. So we don't have to convert people. We have to tell them the truth in love and let Jesus do the rest. Right. As for why I don't believe in YEC, I've been convinced that the evidence suggests that YEC is not accurate. If the evidence proves that it is, I would be 100% okay with that. I was a YEC until about 5 years ago. I have no problems with that, but I just don't think that's where the evidence is right now. And I don't want to lie and say I do think that. I'd rather say I don't think that's the case and be wrong than lie and say, oh, I think I have to believe in YEC because I'm a Christian. I don't like that. That's not okay.
So for those who joined late, we were intending to have John B., a professional geochemist who studies, he's a paleogeochemist. He studies fossils and cave formations, and he can explain that. If I mischaracterize John B., apologies. We've also had Jordan K. on this channel, and he'll be out of pocket for about 5 weeks. I did issue apology to him this Sunday. I had overran my time, and I think that crowd, you know, he ended up not having, he ended up thinking that I wasn't going to present his 8 hours of dedicated, an entire weekend he spent on refuting a creationist paper, which I actually endorsed by and large, Jordan's refutation of Russell Rada's Creation Research Society paper. But Jordan and I have been in contact. We're trying to work on the problem. So again, for those who don't know, I used to be a theistic evolutionist. I became an old Earth. After I became a Christian, I still believed in evolution. Became an old Earth creationist after about 1 or 2 years, and then for about 2 decades was an old Earth creationist. Once, ironically, I started going to graduate school and studying physics, I became a young Earth creationist. And so BENT here and myself have actually gone opposite directions.
I find that ironic. I do find that ironic. A friend of mine, mostly a friend of my dad's, he went to our church growing up, passed away a couple months ago. He was also, he went to our church. He was also a chemistry teacher at my YEC private high school. He was known as like the hardest teacher, or one of 2 of like the hardest teachers at the school. I didn't actually take his class. He claimed that he was trying to disprove God and looked into evidence and was convinced, oh wait, evolution isn't real. And then he became a Christian. And the arguments he gave that I remember were rebutted so fast by the simpletons on YouTube in the debunking community, debunking YEC, so fast. Now, I don't know all of the arguments he learned, but I know that that is all of what my exposure was. Of course I was a YEC, but once we reached that point where I'm like, oh, okay, people that I know a lot about, or a lot more about on certain things, are like easily refuting these things. Maybe I need to reconsider,
Yes. So what had happened to me, and, I don't pretend, maybe a diagram if I could share my transformation. And I like what you said about don't lie to people.
Sal, tell them I don't think you lie to people, and I think you are respectful to people, and that's why I tell you, you are so respected by so many people right now, because we're not all going to agree, but you're not pulling cheap shots. You're not misinterpreting people on purpose, that I can tell at least. You're treating people honestly, like an honest agent would. And that, to me, is so obvious when people do it, and so obvious when they don't do it. It's like a kid with chocolate ice cream on his face. I didn't eat the ice cream. And the parents are like, okay, do you believe me? Well, no, I don't. There's chocolate ice cream all over your face, kid. Come on. Well, you don't have that on your face. You have a clean face.
Thank you. Well, the reason I have that policy is I came from a secular environment, and I saw the young Earth creationist community have really bad arguments, and their behavior was terrible. And it's something that carries over today. I don't get along with a lot of my young Earth creationist colleagues, especially on the internet. I take exception to certain people, and I ban certain creationists from this channel because they had just such an attitude. And these are often people that are least qualified to prosecute. I think their lack of knowledge it's inversely proportional to how loud they are sometimes. And anyone that's matriculated in secular schools, I could say I believe in young Earth creationism, but I'll say, okay, here are the problems. And that's the fair thing to do. Because a lot of the very loud, the vocal people are just like, okay, do you even have a college degree in a scientific discipline? Do you have one in biology? Have you struggled through a physics discipline? And in some of the loudmouths on the internet who are for young Earth creationism, I just cringe. I just think you're actually anti-evangelist, because some of the stuff you're teaching is so bad. If some of them, God help them, if they actually learned creationism and believed you because of the garbage you're spewing, they go off to college, you're going to get slaughtered.
I was in a similar position, and my faith was strongly challenged. And I had to work through that. And I believe Dapper and I, because we were old Navy friends, it's where we met. So,
wow, I didn't know. I actually didn't know that.
So
did you know Sphincter of Doom too?
Yep. Wow. We were all on the same ship together, and a bunch of others of us. Yeah. So I think we started a call. It wasn't Discord. It was something like Discord. I don't remember, but it was like at 10 at night, and I had college class the next day, and I was like, all right, I could talk a little bit about this. And he was like explaining cladistics and evolution and how that works. It was like 8 a.m. when I finally got off that call, and it was what, 10 hours of him trying to get it through my head, like just how badly I was misunderstanding what evolution was, because I had been taught by the BENT Hovinds of what evolution is. And it's so not at all what evolution teaches. And when you go to college, and I'm like a freshman biology course doing like an evolution, what YECs would call, or what the BENT Hovinds would call the adaptation or the microevolution, but it's evolution. We're doing that experiment, and I'm like learning how it's going to work. We're making the prediction on our stinking homework paper. We're doing it. It's working. It's like, I'm sorry, but I appreciate the Bible a lot, but I don't think it's okay to call it a science book, because the rules of science have come into being after the Bible was written. Like the observation, identification, description, the whole scientific method, that's not from the Bible, is it? I don't think that's in the Bible anywhere. Someone please correct me if I am wrong. But, and you know, that's what Uncle Kent No Relation says. He says the Bible is, how does he say, literally true and scientifically accurate. It's not a science book. Not everything that's true has to be literally true. Poetry can be true.
And I have a burning question here. I mean,
sure.
How did you? Okay, I can somewhat understand, because I was a theistic evolutionist for a while.
Okay.
For me personally, the reason I'm a Christian is I believe I've seen miraculous answers to prayer. I had a vision when I was 12 or 13 years old, and I've met other Christians that have had miraculous healings in the name of Jesus. One of the most prominent was Charles Duke, astronaut, the youngest man to ever walk on the moon. After he returned from the moon, his life had fallen apart. He accepted Jesus into his life because he saw the transformation in his wife. He prayed over a blind girl. The blind girl was healed. Given that he's a national hero, was not a professional evangelist, was an astronaut, a military general, it's like, okay, it's a successful businessman. He had no reason to be inflating his resume by saying, I work miracles in the name of Jesus. To me, he's a credible witness. And I'm just like, yeah, you know, there are people like Benny Hinn I'd be pretty skeptical of, and others. So at a very, very personal level, that's why I was a believer. But beyond that, studying Bertrand Russell, I realized I can't find any reason for living in that. I mean, that's not proof that atheism is false, but it certainly was a dead end for me. I said I'd take what little scraps of evidence I have and go with it. So that's my story, how I remained in the Christian faith. I'd be curious to hear about yours.
Well, I could give you a story. I mean, I grew up in a Christian home. My father was a pastor, non-denominational church in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And it made sense to me going to church, hearing about Jesus. It all made sense to me. You know, I don't really know what to say beyond that. Like, I believed it since I can remember, and that doesn't mean I've always practiced the best life, but I've been walking by grace more than by the law, because I don't know if you know, that's impossible. And it's hard to keep trying and trying. So I'm going to do that anymore. But I prefer to live by grace. It is the free gift. And though we don't deserve it, We were offered it. So, yeah. So yeah, I never really left my faith, I would say. I've always been a Christian since I can remember. The biggest challenge was, I think, learning that in college about how evolution actually works and why it makes sense, and then learning why Kent Hovind is lying and how he's lying about like the 6 stages of evolution, and then learning about how you're supposed to like cite your sources when you're writing papers in college, and you're supposed to use, like, for most of my classes, like, you're supposed to like go to this database but make sure your papers are 5 years old or newer, because science changes fast. And you'll find things that you think are really good, but it's 12 years old, and then you'll find something newer, and you're like, oh, more science was done. The Kent Hovinds of the world think all the science was finished a long time ago. They think science is a collection of trivial facts. That's why he always says some random useless fact is going to be on your quiz next week. Like, who cares about some random person's wife's name and some Bible verse? That's not at all important for a quiz for a college level course. At all. It's trivia. Trivia is nothing but trivia.
Well, I think I call the Dapper Dino crowd the Kent Hovind scholars. You all are much more knowledgeable about the
No,
things
we've just watched a lot. It's just exposure.
I don't have the patience for it.
I don't either. That's why I don't watch Kent with Bent. Please watch Kent with Bent, everyone. So, I won't.
Oh, yes. By the way,
I'm in it, but I don't watch it. It's too hard to watch. It's hard for me to hear Kent's voice, especially after the trouble he's been getting in lately.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Well, I knew that he was suspect from like day one that I heard him. Day one.
No.
And you know, even though I was an old Earth creationist at the time, I was like, I'm really kind of on your side because I don't like evolution or abiogenesis. But I'm like, dude, you got to clean up your act.
I bought right into his stuff so much.
And I've taken flack for saying, stay away from him. And now that someone died at his amusement park, I said, keep your kids away from him. And then after what happened with his 4 wives, one of them being Cindy Lincoln, I just like, really keep everyone away from him. This is not good. And someone who dresses in a Superman suit is promoting him heavily, and I disapprove of that channel. I don't think that's a good source.
I might not be familiar with that channel, but it doesn't matter.
It goes by the title Monkey for Banana.
That doesn't matter.
Okay.
I've heard nicknames and other names a lot, and I don't pay attention.
Well, I'm trying to dissuade getting YouTube traffic directed to that place.
Fair.
Because
Dapper will tell me exactly who it is as soon as we're done with this call. So
yeah, I'm just like, dude, you're not qualified in any of this. You're criticizing me and other people. You have no knowledge base in this. I was a professional researcher in young Earth creationism for 7 years. I'm now an independent, but I mean, that was my paid job. And I'm just like, some of that guy on the internet, it's like, and
they don't have the credibility that is kind of important. You know, how am I going to trust what Kent Hovind says about evolution when it seems obvious he's never taken a freshman level college course of biology? It just seems obvious, because once you get to that level and you take that course, you're like, this guy does not know any of the stuff being taught here. I'm not saying he doesn't agree with it. He doesn't know it.
Yeah.
He can pull out some random things from old textbooks, but you can tell if he took that course, he did not get a good grade in it, or he does not have good retention at all.
Right. And I'll say, by contrast, Dr. Sanford, with his own money out of his own pocket, paid to send me to school in biology. And that was also kind of a retraining over 4 years where I'd be working and then going to school. And he had me go to the NIH FAES graduate school. It's unaccredited, but if you go to Johns Hopkins University and you're a PhD student, you'll be awarded class credits for attending an unaccredited school there. That's how good they are. Now this class, the classrooms there were intimidating. One of the professors there was Cy Gart, who we see here occasionally on.
I think I've seen one.
Yeah, he's
Maybe
a very senior biochemist, and he was a professor at my school. So it's kind of, we had kind of a mini reunion, even though I never took any of Cy Gart's classes at the NIH. But, you know, I was sent to learn about creation, God's creation, from evolutionists. And I had, you know, I studied under a top evolutionary biologist. And like, okay, so if any of you are matriculating, any of you Christians out there, science students, I feel your pain. If you're creationist, not only because of the creationism, but this is hard. This is a hard discipline. And so when I hear people on the net criticizing me and just like, you guys don't know what you're talking about, you can't even get your basic biology right, and you're bloviating about population genetics. I published in secular venues on population genetics, and you're criticizing me when I'm sometimes friendly to Dr. Dan, and I'll say, Dr. Dan, I think you have a good point.
That's the first time I saw you, was a debate with him a couple of years back with Dr. Dan. And I was like, I don't know who either one of these guys, but I like both of them, and I still do. So,
oh, thank you. And so this is hard. So what I consider honesty is like, okay, I will say I could be wrong. Don't cite me as an authority, but I also have a response. I try to tell both sides fairly as I can. I'll tell you what my biases are, and that's all I can.
I have one undergraduate degree in cytotechnology, and I'm trying to act like I have that degree and not like I have a bunch of other degrees, but not like I have no degrees, but not like cytotechnology is all of biology. It's not. It's just
so you have a biology degree effectively.
Technically, I do have a biology minor, but the actual training is pretty specific to basically triaging biopsies and interpreting cells on slides as whether or not they're malignant or dysplastic or things like that.
See, that's excellent. You already have more biology background than most people.
Right, but I don't think I don't know if I've ever mentioned that on Kent with BENT, because it's not really related to anything that's being talked about. It's important to be honest. Like, what I hear Kent say something that I know is wrong, I will rebut it the best way I know how, which I'll just say usually is trying to be more of a layperson type of explanation, whereas Dapper's, his retention is just so stinking high.
Yeah.
He remembers so much about like the stuff we learned in the Navy that I'm like, nope, I forgot that. I'm glad I forgot that because it was stressful, but like, yeah, he just has so much retention. Anyway.
So the people that I've said would be better role models for young earth creationism are Rob Stadler, Change Tan, Joe DeWeese, and even a non-creationist, not a non-ID guy would be James Tour. On this channel, we've also had Ryan Hayes and James Carter. I don't know specifically about Ryan Hayes. I think he's at least an old earth creationist, if not a young earth creationist. James Carter, 27 years in school, 11 of those years in graduate school getting his PhD, which is just grueling, and then 15 years as a professor. He knows his stuff. But as often happens, the people that draw the most attention to themselves have the least qualifications because they're basically entertainers.
Right. Well, that's one way to look at it. I think it can be easy to think you know a lot more than you do about something until you really start learning about it. And then you realize, oh my goodness, I know nothing about this. And you keep learning and learning and learning, and you get so specific, and you're like, there's so much more to know. So I think a lot of people fall into that category. They think they're right there at the pinnacle of, I know I'm right because I know 3 major facts or something like that, you know? Well, maybe step back and think you might not be right about everything. And I feel like you do that. I try to do that, you know, when someone makes a claim that you don't understand or don't agree with, I'll see you sit there and kind of look up and think about it, and then like maybe take a note or something, or you're giving what people say consideration, right?
Yes.
That's what any YECs who want to do stuff on YouTube, you treat people with respect and listen to them. Don't say, I am listening while you're looking over here and typing. Listen to them. And that's it. That's it. Be equal. Love your neighbor. I mean, that's really all it's doing. So.
Well, I'm going to, now that you're here, and if you do see me going back and forth, you probably know this. I have to run the controls. And then sometimes I'm trying to also look at the comments, because in my restream panel, I lose a lot of comments. So I'm going to have to retitle the thumbnail and everything, because we're going totally off script today. So let me share how I got to where I am. And this is a graph I use a lot, and feel free to ask me questions. So I've followed the creationism debate really for over 40 years, and growing up in the 70s, I was definitely accepting the mainstream viewpoints about everything. So the color green means I think the arguments are well characterized in favor of intelligent design and or young earth creationism. Red means that they're not. And, orange and yellow are kind of in between. So in the 70s, there were lots of, I kind of, this is my way of characterizing the categories important to the young earth creation model. In the 70s, there were some arguments I didn't even know about. So pre-70s, I accepted everything. Even in the 1970s, I did. I became a Christian in 1978. In 1980, that's when I became an old earth creationist, because I felt the emergence of the first life had to be miraculous. And I extrapolated that to say, well, pretty much all life at that point. It just seemed too complex, which is an argument we hear today. By the 1990s, I pretty much rejected all evolutionary theory. And this is just my own personal assessment. But I felt the arguments for the Earth being old were actually still very, very strong. I couldn't quite reconcile it with the way that I read the Genesis account. And I really had no, I came from a Presbyterian background. And so, they didn't, unlike other denominations, they didn't even talk about young earth creationism. The Presbyterians were very focused on Calvinism. Okay, there's a lot more talk about predestination and all that than even 1 ounce of young earth creationism. No talk of Noah's flood. So kind of like, okay, I read Genesis, I read the genealogy of Christ in the New Testament, and I said, well, it doesn't fit what I'm reading in science books. So, well, like a lot of things, there's stuff in the Bible I don't understand, and I'll just leave it at that. But on a basis of complexity, I just said I think it's just too improbable for life to come up. Oh, okay. So Dapper is asking, I thought you were Catholic. I was raised in a Catholic home. My mother and father are Catholics. In high school, my next door neighbor was a Presbyterian minister, and he recommended me to a Presbyterian church at Virginia Tech, my first school, which I flunked out of, by the way. And that's how I became I began to be a part of the Presbyterian Church. Actually, at the time, it was the Presbyterian Church Reformed Evangelical Synod, RPCES. It merged into the PCA. So I was raised in a Catholic home, became a Christian as a Catholic, and then under the influence of my next door neighbor, who was a Presbyterian minister, I became Presbyterian Calvinist. I no longer self-identify as a Calvinist. So that's kind of the long history of that. I'm now, I think technically I'm in limbo because I've been trespassed from my church, McLean Bible, which is supposed to be non-denominational. And that's a whole nother mess. And people who've been following the drama know what happened to me. Threatened with arrest and jail because I was calling out the pastor on what I think are some shady activities, financial and otherwise. So that's my history. But so I'll go back to the graph here. So in 1990, you see all the green there. 2002, I nearly left the Christian faith. I had a crisis of faith. My dad was terminally ill, and like a lot of people, when we're encountering the problem of evil, it can strain our faith. Charles Darwin, his biographers believe the death of his daughter contributed to his loss of faith, becoming an agnostic. And so in 2002, I began to kind of just doubt everything. And however, I started to study intelligent design and creationism there. By 2010, I had begun to vociferously feel that I was to believe that the universe and the origin of life and the emergence of complexity were not through naturalistic processes. So if I may pause here a little bit, like Michael Behe, who accepts, I'm having a little trouble here. Give me a second. Like Mike, I'm having a problem with the keyboard. Like Michael Behe, who accepts common descent, he feels the evolution of complexity would require something more than what naturalism can explain. He uses the word intelligent design. I would call it miraculous. Stephen Meyer, who's an ID proponent, he leans toward common descent with progressive creation. So roughly, and this is very crude, the Discovery Institute could be described as being representing old Earth creationism or old Earth creationism / intelligent design. The Institute of Creation Research is definitely young Earth creation. I visited both institutes in Dallas. They have a Dallas office, the Discovery Institute, this past January, and it's amazing how much on the same page they are, except for the age of the Earth. So going back to this graph here, I felt that a major component, if you're a young Earth creationist, you automatically believe in intelligent design, but the reverse is not necessarily true because there are a lot of old Earth creationists. One of the most important old Earth creationists is Richard Smalley, depicted there. He's right here, Nobel Prize winner in chemistry. He rejects evolution and naturalistic evolution and abiogenesis. So he's the first major scientist that I know of that really of prominence, that he's the father of nanotechnology, that rejected evolutionary theory. So I roughly the areas that Michael Behe covers and the Discovery Institute are intelligent design, and that's a component of young Earth creationism. Young Earth creationism would include intelligent design, but then arguments about against the evolution of the solar system, the cosmos, and the supposed long ages of the Earth. So even let me just redo the calendar a little bit. In 2022, where we stand today, I feel it's turned green a little more, and that's my personal assessment. Other people feel differently, and at some point, I'm hoping it all changes. So, what were the things that contributed to me getting there? first off, in a class on supplementary quantum mechanics, my professor, James Trefle, he had a chapter in his book on dark matter. Chapter 4, the 5 reasons why galaxies can't exist. And that really, I found it very compelling because it was a subtle critique of the Big Bang, and there were professors in my university that were openly critical of the Big Bang. And then also, before that, I'd read this book, Solar System Evolution. And I'm like, none of the mainstream models could be right, because even in these secular, so this is the funny thing is, because I was studying the secular works, a lot of times I'd stumble on things that said the theory could be dead wrong. And I'm just like, that's not what I heard in the popular press. And of course that would get my attention. And then when you hear kind of the whispers of professors or the dissenting professors, and then the fellow graduate students, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is not as well established as the popular press seems to make it out to be. And then please go on, Ken.
I was just gonna say all of that is just like the opposite of how all of that was for me.
Yeah.
Like if I had your chart, the colors would be basically switched. I mean, I've never thought about the dates and the years like that, but it just would be switched. So like, and then I hear things that, I don't know, something maybe I heard from Kent or someone like him years and years ago that I never had heard the rebuttal for, and then now I'll hear a rebuttal for it. And then, so it's just like, it's not exactly the same as what you're saying, but it's similar, and yet the opposite. But it is similar, and it's like,
because you get the feeling you've been lied to.
Well, I know for sure I was lied to.
And for sure you were lied to.
That doesn't mean what people told me was false. It means that what they told me was true. They were not fully convinced of it, and they acted like they were in a deceptive manner, and I saw through it eventually, and now I have no reason to trust anything they said. So why? Look, how you treat people matters. If you treat them without respect, that matters. Like, your credibility matters, your reputation or your character, all of this matters, right?
Absolutely.
And people might not even know why they like you or don't like you. They might not have any idea why, but their brains know.
Oh, by the way, there's a thunderstorm going on right now. I don't know if you can barely hear it. This stream could end by an act of God pretty quick, just as a heads up. So, and I think that's why I've never, I never went through a deconstruction process of young Earth creationism like a lot of ex-Kent Hovind people, is because I didn't start out as a young Earth creationist, and I think that is...
Well, and you didn't start out as a young Earth creationist mostly because of Kent Hovind. Now, my dad was... I remember being young and asking him how old the Earth is, and he said 6,000 years or something like that. So he was a YC, but he didn't watch Kent Hovind. He was... I think my mom had it on sometimes, or it'd be on and we'd be flipping through, or... stop at the Christian channel. Oh, it's that Dr. Dino guy, the guy who never really had considered how to identify a skeleton as a dinosaur or not until Dapper Dino asked him in a debate, 2 years ago. And he said, gee, interesting question. I would have to do some research on that, or something like that. And it was like, wait, you've never thought about, if you found a skeleton, you've never considered how you would tell if it was a dinosaur or not as a fossil. And you call yourself Dr. Dino for decades. Like, that kind of, oh my goodness, why am I believing this guy? Because my friend from the Navy did this to him on YouTube. He's just my friend from the Navy. Like, that kind of takes away.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know how to phrase what I'm trying to say, but it really opens your eyes a bit, opens my eyes a bit.
Someone commented that you seemed really hurt by Dr. Dino. And I'm just like, yeah. And
I feel hurt by him. I just feel like The thing that bothers me is that there are people like me who will eventually, maybe even through Kent with Bent episodes, who will eventually say, I reject Kent now because I now know better, and they'll leave their faith, and I don't want them to leave their faith. Yeah. And that's Kent's fault. I think he's accountable for that. Because once he starts lying and he knows he's lying, he's without excuse at that point, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, but I think that's pretty stinking dangerous of him, you know, for his own soul. Because if my opinion on that is correct, his soul might be in trouble, and that's not a good thing. I don't even want him to perish. I want him to find repentance. You know, it's...
Well, you know, I try not to go into the personal things. I just try to go into, one, his science, because that can be argued vociferously.
Mm-hmm.
And I am concerned about the deconstruction of people, because they are raised up on junk, and when they realize that their faith was based on things that were untrue, that's not healthy, because then they're likely to just leave altogether. And that concerns me a lot. It'd be better to say, and I try to say this, is, you know, I'd say some of the evidence favors young earth creationism, but it has a lot of problems. That's the most honest thing I think I could say.
Okay.
And then
I believe you're being honest, because you've demonstrated in the past that you are honest. I don't agree with the claim, but that's not relevant right now, right?
And then so, like, okay, so then we could start with, like, okay, how about the emergence of the universe? Is it fine-tuned? We can have a discussion on that. And I mean, not you and me personally, but I'm just saying.
Could, though.
Yeah.
I mean, look, as far as I know, because when I think of abiogenesis, I think at one point we didn't have life on Earth, then we did. That's abiogenesis. I don't know if it happened in a puddle of goo. I don't know if God miracled it. I just know that it happened because we didn't have life, and now we do. Now, I'm not giving you whatever scientific definition of abiogenesis that would probably make sense to how I described it, but I'm not thinking of it scientifically. I'm thinking of it like science is true, and the Bible says something, and there are different ways you can interpret it. I don't have to reject science and be a crazy person to believe in the Bible, and so I'm not going to. But like I said, if I were convinced of evidence that the YEC was accurate, I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
But it's hard to do that because the evidence is incredibly complicated.
So I'm not here, you know, just for the audience's sake, and then also just for your own information. I wasn't here to debate anything particularly. I think the way our conversation has gone, where we described our journeys, is really what my goal was. And I wanted to find out where you came from. And I think your story needs to be heard. And a lot of people that have been damaged by Kent Hovind need to hear this. I'm very, you know, like I said, I was immune from that because I disregarded him from the start. I disregarded most young earth creationists from the start. I thought, with the exception of that ICR track that led to my conversion to creationism, because it was critical of abiogenesis. And I think the criticisms, anyone who watched the recent takedown of Dave Farina by James Tour, and we've had professional chemists here like James Carter evaluate that exchange. And we evaluated on a very, very technical level, not superficially. And there are a lot of biochemists, even Sygart, who's a theistic evolutionist, said James Tour made a very good argument, critical. So here we have a theistic evolutionist who was saying, yeah, James Tour really, you know, from a scientific standpoint, really just laid it out. And I really respected what Sygart had to say there. So with the exception of that track by the ICR, I rejected most of what they had to say. I didn't like, and this is the old ICR of Henry Morris and Duane Gish. It's not the more modern ICR that has just a different set of scholars And one thing I found is that there's been anyone like, for example, Joe DeWeese. We're seeing more and more young Earth creationists in the secular world who are professional scientists as well, like Change Tan and Rob Stadler. Rob Stadler's a PhD in MIT and Harvard. Change Tan's Harvard postdoctoral, University of Pennsylvania, which is Ivy League trained PhD, taught molecular biology at a secular college. These are what I consider the people that should be role models and resources, not Kent Hovind. Now,
right.
Fortunately,
well,
people,
they weren't on TV like they weren't on television like Kent was when I was growing up. So,
yeah.
And honestly, one thing about Kent is, at least back when he was younger, is like very charismatic. Got that smile and really good with rhetoric. I mean, who wouldn't want to watch that on TV if you didn't know any better? If you were the kind of person who was going to eat that stuff up, like I was, like as a, I don't know, 8-year-old or 10-year-old kid or whatever. I mean, as a teenager too, it was. I remember seeing him every once in a while for years and years and years. So.
Yeah. So again, that is what I've been trying to say. Now, unfortunately, the personality types like Joe DeWeese, Change Tan, they're not going to be out there in the public sphere. Definitely John Sanford. Oh my goodness. When I was working for him, he's the only boss I had where I really looked forward to hearing from him, because I would work and then 6 weeks would pass and I never heard from him. See, I just do whatever, Sal. And he's a very, very busy man. He strikes me as being the executive type. He was very successful in business as well, having the patent on the gene gun.
That's a good one.
Dustin Buck asked, "Do I believe in God?" Yes, I'm a professing Christian. I'm a young Earth creationist. But how is it that I could be so critical of other young Earth creationists?
What?
It's because their science is often bad, except for the other kind. There are some that are terrible, some that are good. The ones that are terrible get the public eye, and I don't appreciate the fact that they are representing Christianity and young Earth creationism. I've actually said, when I was at the ICR, I talked to one of the researchers there. I said, you know what? I think on some level, the non-Christian, or at least the evolutionary side, loves Kent Hovind, because he misrepresents the entire movement, and he's a great target. If you wanted to if you just wanted to win the argument by showing dirty laundry, you'd love Kent Hovind, because he has so much of it. Kind of like the Jim Baker of televangelism. It's just so bad. And so I don't know. I lost the point I was.
No, I think look,
but he's very charismatic. Oh yeah, the point I was making is the ones that really have the good data, like Change Tan, Rob Stadler, James Carter, Joe DeWeese. You'll hardly ever see them on the net, and you'll almost never see Dr. Sanford on the internet. It took James Tour to bring him out of kind of his kind of focus in the laboratory to make a public appearance. So the very people that get all the attention are often the least qualified.
Yeah, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. That doesn't really apply. It's more like you just go on YouTube and be really loud, and people will listen, right? Or 20 years ago, go on television and be really loud. People will listen, and that's really all it is. Like, I'd love to hear from these other gentlemen you've mentioned, but you say they're hard to find on the internet. So,
well, they have written publications, and oh guys, just as a public service announcement, Change Tan and Rob Stadler have appeared on this channel. I have videos to that effect, and also James Carter. These are you talk about nerd torture sessions. listening to me interact with them is going to be a nerd torture session, but they've been here. They've also had publications. Joe DeWeese, he appeared in a recent Discovery Institute video on topoisomerases. I think that should be epic. But if you heard his 1 hour, 15-minute Q&A, that definitely was a nerd torture session. I mean, he is a professor. He is a professor, former professor, associate professor at Lipscomb University, then Freed Hardeman, and he's still an adjunct professor at Vanderbilt School of Medicine. He's published in the prestigious scientific journal Nature, has numerous other publications, and I'm honored to say I'm at least a co-author in at least 2 of them.
Nice.
So, his name is hardly ever mentioned in the YouTube sphere. It all focuses on Hovind. And I was saying, if you want to have kind of an anti-evangelist, have a Kent Hovind, because then you could have these Kent with Bent shows almost unending every Tuesday night. We're up to what, episode 76?
Something like that.
Yeah, because it's a never-ending supply of bad. And so kind of in an ironic way.
And it's so repetitive. It's so repetitive. He says the same thing so many times over and over.
Oh, okay. Since we're kind of totally off script, and again, for those who joined late, John B. was ill, couldn't come tonight. And I know he must be pretty ill because last week he came on my show with hardly any sleep, having come back just from Istanbul. And Big Can Fly said, actually, there is a PhD physicist on the James Tour video regarding abiogenesis that speaks to the issue of the second law of thermodynamics. I happen to know him because he actually asked me to review one of his papers, and that's Brian Miller. Brian Miller and I mostly agree, except on the second law of thermodynamics. So I would encourage people, Dapper, if you're there, he's a moderator. He can link to my show on the second law of thermodynamics. I think it's a terrible argument against abiogenesis. Some ID proponents are using it. Now, the thing I get upset about is I'll talk to other creationists and ID proponents, and I'll say, I don't think the second law of thermodynamics is a good argument against abiogenesis, and they'll say, I agree with you. And it's like, why aren't more people saying that?
Why aren't more people being honest? If that's what people think, but they're hanging on to something to try and convince the other side, then they're not being honest. And if that's not what's happening, then I'm apologizing for thinking that's happening. But I think that's kind of what's happening. People are insecure of their own faith.
Oh, it's a little more subtle than that, I think.
Maybe. I'm sure it is.
And having gone through this with Cindy Lincoln, it's like, I'm hoping someone else will do the dirty job of calling out. I'm hoping it won't have to fall on my shoulders to be the guy that's going to call someone, a colleague out, so to speak.
Sal, you are the best at what you do on the internet right now. And I mean that by how, like, Dapper is the best at what he does on the internet, and Gutsy Gibbons is the best at what she does. They're all very subtly different things here and there. You're really good at what you do on your YouTube channel, in my opinion. So I'm not going to say that's your calling or that's how it should be interpreted, but I'd say run with it.
Well, thank you. Well, I didn't want to do the dirty deed, so to speak. And there's kind of like, it was kind of the Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment. Thou shalt not criticize publicly another Republican. And it's like, thou shalt not criticize openly another ID proponent or creationist. And I'm like, why not? And you
should if they're lying and if it's obvious.
And what ended up happening is when I break ranks and kind of side with, Dapper Dino or yourself or anyone else and say, well, the truth is the truth. Boy, I'll get an earful. And I've had the band creationists on this channel just saying all sorts of lousy things about me because I said, I think Kent Hovind does not represent the qualifications of an elder. minister of the gospel in his position, having been married 4 times in 5 years. That just does not look good. The Bible says such a person should be above reproach. That doesn't look above reproach to me.
Well,
there
are a lot of standards on, and it's hard to say that's above reproach on anyone's standards. And I'm not talking about just the divorces, but like I don't want to say it, but the legal trouble he got in for what happened with him and his wife, like that.
Yeah, domestic.
I don't want to use the term because I don't know how stuff works with YouTube and demonetization and stuff, but like, who, Christian, atheist, whatever, who would think that behavior is considered above reproach?
Yeah.
Right? No one.
There's a saying that it's in the New Testament, men should be able to run their own households well. That means the relationship with your wife, independent of whether the domestic violence thing is correct, it shouldn't get to the point where it gets that bad between a husband and wife, and I felt that there was mental cruelty at the least. And I just like, this just doesn't look good. And then it's the science that really bothered me. And then the death of a child and the callousness of how that was handled. I'm just like, okay, at some point you get just sick to your stomach
of
what's going on. And then kind of the slave labor that's going there. I mean, after a while, you smell smoke, there's fire. I've worked for Christian organizations. I never heard as many people coming out and complaining afterward as I had about Dinosaur Adventureland. And I said, guys, there are better places to go if you want to learn Christianity and creationism. I've tried to advertise that. I mean, I'm grateful for people who come to my channel, but there are people way more senior than myself, like Joe DeWeese, Change Tan, Rob Stadler, and I'm keeping, I'm sorry if I'm offending people, their names. And then there's the intelligent design community, really super guys, including Brian Miller, who I disagree with on the second law, but we agree on many other things. And I think Stephen Meyer's a great guy. I mean, why don't, these are better people. And even someone who's not a creationist or ID proponent, James Tour, he's a much better person to learn science from and Christianity. Of course, sadly, these are also the very same people you won't see on the internet, because
lots of names I've never heard of and some I have, but
John Sanford, but
I've heard of him.
You'll hardly ever see him on. It's so hard to get. It's a miracle we ended up building a relationship. I just met him at a conference, and that one thing led to another. There are probably other. Oh, my favorite is a creationist physicist, John Gideon Hartnett. Could I read his qualifications, guys? If that'd be, let me describe what I think a Christian and a creationist, young Earth creationist should be. And this is from the Wikipedia article, and I'm just going to read it publicly here. And let me see. Dapper Dino, before I forget, the reason I asked if you're still there was, if you could provide a link, if you could provide a link to that thermodynamics discussion, that'd be great. Otherwise, I'll provide one. I have a copy of that on my channel. But I'm going to read about John Gideon Hartnett here. This is what I consider a real creationist. Let's see. And I'm going to just read his entry here. Oh boy, let's see, Chrome tab. Let me get all my buttons squared away here. Having a little problem again. Give me a moment to try to fix this. I'm having problems with my keyboard on my primary computer. Hence, I have the secondary computer going. So I'll just start to read this. John Hartnett, born March 24th, 1952, is an Australian young Earth creationist and cosmologist. He has been active with Creation Ministries International and is known for his opposition to the Big Bang Theory and criticism of the dark matter and dark energy hypothesis. He received both his BS honors 1973 and PhD with distinction in 2001 from the School of Physics at the University of Western Australia. He currently works as a research fellow at the University of Adelaide, South Australia. He's published more than 200 papers in scientific journals, book chapters, and conference proceedings, holds one patent, works on the development of ultra-stable cryo-cooled sapphire oscillators, and participated on a Sapphire Clock Ensemble project, atomic clock ensemble in space mission run by the European Space Agency. He's also written articles for several creationist journals, and according to Creation Ministries International, Hartnett believes that God is the real creator of the universe, as the Bible says. His research interests include ultra-low noise radar and ultra-high stability cryogenic microwave oscillators and clocks based on pure single crystal sapphire resonators. Applications for the latter are to provide low-noise local oscillators to atomic physics labs, time and frequency atomic fountain standards, and very high frequency VLBI, very long baseline interferometry, radio astronomy. The terrestrial clock technology co-developed by him is claimed to be the most stable in the universe, with Hartnett et al. Stating it outperformed the stability of signals generated by pulsars, rotating neutron stars that produce highly periodic bursts of radio waves, such as astronomical sources, are then used as natural clocks, e.g. for physics. Further on, he's interested in the development of cryo-cooled CSO resonators, detection of WISPs using low-noise microwave techniques, tests of the fundamental theories of physics, such as special and general relativity, measurement of drift and fundamental constants, and their cosmological implications in cosmology and the large-scale structure of the universe. He's also part of a team of scientists who are building liquid helium-cooled oscillators used by sapphire clocks for the National Meteorology Institute of Japan in Tsukuba, Japan. My point is, you want to follow a young Earth creationist with credentials, a dedicated Christian, and an accomplished secular.
John Hartnett is a guy.
John Hartnett's the guy.
I'm actually reading right now. I pulled up his Wikipedia page while you were doing that, and I'm reading one of the references on the clocks because that's really interesting to me.
So
I'll finish reading that later, but yeah, like.
All right, a little backstory. Thank God that some young Earth creationists, senior like him, were interested in my professional and academic development. William Dembski and Robert Marks, who are in the intelligent design movement, had first approached me to be their graduate student. And then John Hartnett approached me, invited me to be his PhD graduate student. He has several PhDs under him that graduated through him. And I ended up with John Sanford instead. So I've been very flattered. I could have been like in the biology, bioinformatics side, in the physics side. I ended up being in the genetics, protein side because of John Sanford. But because John Hartnett was in Australia, I couldn't leave my mom. I knew that was off the table. I was taking care of my mom. So I met John Hartnett in 2008, and mom was still relatively healthy then, but in retrospect, it was the good decision. Not to mention, I think I'd be really scared to be driving on the left side of the highway and driving from the right side. I'm just like, I haven't
you'd get used to it.
time. Huh?
You'd get used to it, and then you'd come back here and you'd get into accidents here.
Oh boy.
That's probably what would happen. You'd be like, oh yeah, I can handle that. I changed once, I could change again. It'll be easy. And then no, I don't know.
Well, anyway, yeah. So these are the circles of the people I ran into, and nuclear physicists like Eugene Chafin and Don DeYoung. How many people have heard of these young Earth creationists or nuclear physicists? Now, there are very few of us, and at the time in 2000, by 2013, I was still among one of the only 5 young Earth creationists I knew that studied general relativity. So many of us are few and far between, but I think the numbers are increasing. We're always going to be small, but this is, I'm just trying to say, guys, there's another world of young Earth creationism that's more than Kent Hovind or Ken Ham. Right. And what I didn't like, and that's very hurtful to me, is when I was struggling with my faith, the churches have a tendency to just bully people when they ask tough questions. Rather than answer your questions directly, they'll say, "Oh, there's something wrong with you spiritually."
I don't think they have answers a lot of times. I don't think they have answers, and I think they struggle with being honest about that.
Yeah.
A lot of people are like, "Hey, I don't have an answer," or they should say, "Hey, I don't have an answer for you."
Exactly.
I don't know. But instead,
they'll change the subject.
They say, "Well, you're probably in sin." And I'm like, "Well, I have sinned because every human on earth has. So yeah, I guess I can feel guilty about that now." And then you just go down in this spiral of being controlled by no. That's not why Jesus came here. He didn't come here so that we could be mentally controlled by a church. He came here to give us life and life abundantly. He came here to die for our sins and pay the price.
Amen.
So I'm going to do that. I'm going to let him do that. I can't pay the price. It's too hard. It's too much for me to pay. I'll let him take care of it.
Amen. And you see, this is what it bothered me. I said, the way the churches are run in the United States, they're great atheist factories because they have this policy of not dealing with questions honestly. Honestly is saying, I don't know, or I don't have a good answer. That's the honest thing. I've rarely ever heard that from anyone in the church when I'm expressing my doubts. If they were more straight up with me, it probably wouldn't have hurt so much, but that was very, very hurtful. So my return to Christianity when I nearly left in 2000 to 2002, about 20 years ago, is ironically precipitated by hanging out with atheists. And I said, I love all your skepticism and your welcoming of skepticism. I was an engineer, and I said, skepticism is something you welcome. It's, if someone has a concern about an engineering system, you entertain it. And the first thing you're skeptical about is yourself. Because I would have a team of people that would check my own work because I know I'm prone to mistakes.
Well, everyone makes mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes.
Everybody makes mistakes. And I said, yeah.
People overlook their own mistakes because, I don't know about you, but if I'm ever skimming anything I've written or trying to proofread it, I already wrote it, man. I'm already moving past it so fast. That's why you have to give it to someone else, like you said. And that's why peer review exists. Well, that's one reason why.
And yet, I said, why is the church culture so different, at least the churches I was going to? It's like, no, we're not going to be self-critical and examining of our own arguments and stuff. And I was like, oh my goodness, I don't like this. And they nearly drove me out. So the funny thing is actually hanging out with the atheists that kind of brought me back, because a lot of them were very nice. Many of them were jerks. And I realized those are what we call the anti-theists. There are like 6 categories that one atheist classified. Said, yeah, the anti-theist, the agnostic atheist, the activist atheist, and some others. There's a famous study on this. Okay. And he said, unfortunately, the anti-theists kind of overrepresent in the public eye what atheists are, because they're the most vocal. Unfortunately, they're the most, they subjected them to psychological tests. They're also the most narcissistic, the most unagreeable, antisocial. So you have, those are the anti-theists. The agnostic atheists are more like my temperament. They're, or I'd even say like Gutsick Gibbons' temperament. Just very sweet people. They'll entertain opposing viewpoints. They're interested in exploration. They're not very necessarily, they're mild, I'd say I'm mildly activistic, but that's not the main reason I engage in this. So anyway, a lot of them were nice. But I said, okay, what do you live for? How do you know how do you place values on things? How do you decide what's right and wrong and what's a good thing to pursue? And it really shocked me. I was expecting them to give some profound answer, and it's like, oh no, you make your own meaning. And like, so you have no evidence.
A lot of that, how do you answer those questions scientifically, though?
Yeah, exactly.
You can't. And so I can't. Maybe you can. I can't. I haven't heard one. Yeah. I haven't heard a scientific answer for that kind of thing. But what does that really mean? It means people will have an opinion on something. They'll give you their opinion. Or they'll say, I don't know. Or they'll say, maybe this is meaningless. If there's no creator, it sure feels kind of meaningless. If there's no God, right? But that doesn't make it meaningless. That's just what I think. That doesn't make it real or true, right? So I believe in God, but if there is no God, that this all could still be real and here and true, and there might not be any meaning to it. There might still be some meaning. Meaning might be subjective. It might be keeping your society alive, your civilization alive, passing the great filter, or, there's a lot of things it could mean, but.
And I guess just at a fundamental level, I mean, just for me personally, I said it would be more coherent if there was a God. It would make sense of all this. And like I said, even if I didn't have all the facts in hand, I said I was willing to go with it for that simple reason, because, and I don't want to be too harsh on the atheists here, but I said, okay, you have to apply the same standard to yourselves, especially the anti-theists. You have to apply the same standards to yourself that you're trying to apply to others. So if they're demanding proof of this or that, I said, okay, so now prove to me how you being an atheist will give you answers to the questions of life. How is it that you decide what's right and wrong? And then I began to realize, I said, so you're operating by faith that this is the right path. You have actually no scientific proof. I said, you see, on some level, you're just in the same rut that you're accusing Christians of being. And on some level, probably even worse, because you actually will admit, as a matter of principle, you don't have a scientific answer to those questions. And that's why I began to go back for toward Christianity. And so now I only expected you here to be a couple minutes, Ben. I didn't expect it to be such a long, wonderful show. And I actually was going to cover nuclear stuff. So since I reeled you in for such a long time, you're welcome to stay. I was going to talk a little bit about radioactivity.
No, I think I'll be heading out soon.
Okay.
But it was good to talk to you and finally be on your channel, I think for the first time.
Yeah, it was great.
So
and thank you for showing up.
Sure.
And sharing your heart. And so now we're going to go into nuclear stuff. I'll give you the last word before I go into the true nerd torture here. If you had any, would you like any announcements about your upcoming shows?
I don't have. Watch the things that you want to watch and love your neighbor and treat people with respect, because people are equal to you. No one's better than you. No one's worse than you. So love your neighbor as yourself. And I don't care if you're a Christian, atheist, or something else. It's what the world needs right now. So just please do it. Love your neighbor, please. Okay, that's it. Bye.
Take care. God bless you.
God bless you too.
God bless you. So with that, guys, This is an unexpected treat to have BENT Hovind here. You know, he's someone that my heart goes out to, because when I was in the church, it can be a very authoritarian environment, and where questions are not freely entertained, and that nearly drove me out of the church. Thankfully, I kind of mean this sincerely, thankfully I wasn't raised as a young earth creationist. So I never went through a deconstruction process. As I said, the reason that I became a young earth creationist is the trend of evidence in the study of actually matriculating through secular university, and studying under secular professors who would, let me give, let me see if I have this. I'll read a little bit, and then this will lead to the nuclear stuff. I'll just read this passage. Okay, this is influential on me. This is from my professor, James Treffel. He's a noted science teacher. He said, in the winter and spring of 1986, I had the privilege of spending a sabbatical leave working with the paleontology group at University of Chicago. I was working on the problem of mass extinction, what killed the dinosaurs, and the visit gave me a chance to get acquainted with David Raup, the leader of the group. Dave has been described as the most brilliant paleontologist in the world, an evaluation that, after a period as his collaborator, I think is well deserved. He is also one of those rare individuals who gets tremendous enjoyment from everything they do. He loves to question things that everyone else accepts without question, a trait that I suspect has a lot to do with his success as a scientist. He's also a terrific card player, as I learned to my sorrow at some late-night poker sessions, and spends some of his spare time at his personal computer trying to find a way to beat the system at blackjack. Oh boy, that's a topic close to my heart. I mention these things as background to what I want to tell you about. Something that happened during my visit with the group. We were in Dave's office discussing something or other when he turned to me and asked, right out of the blue, what are the odds that the Big Bang is correct? That brought me up short, as you can imagine. My first impulse was to say, of course it's correct, but I suspected he'd ask me how I knew, so I paused. The more I thought about the question, the more fragments of memory floated into my mind. I recalled at a bag lunch in a prestigious physics department when a prominent senior member of the faculty, I wouldn't dream of embarrassing him by mentioning his name, said that he often thought of leaving a sealed envelope to be opened 50 years after his death. In the envelope would be the predictions about the way certain scientific controversies would turn out. At the top of the list would be the prediction that the interpretation of the redshift as evidence for a universal expansion would turn out to be wrong. This memory, together with my experience of fads and fashions in cosmology that we'll discuss later, made me reluctant to be too dogmatic in my reply. Finally, I said I thought the general picture of the universal expansion from a hot beginning had a very high probability of being right, but that many of the details of our understanding could easily be wrong. This seemed to satisfy Dave, who apparently had thrown the question at me because he had asked the same thing of a member of the Chicago astronomy department and been told that the Big Bang was 100% certain. Like any skillful gambler, Dave distrusted a sure thing. But the more I thought about the question, the more I realized that it is not possible to give a single definitive answer to it. The Big Bang Theory has many facets, and as each of us has different level of confidence attached to it. And each has a different level of confidence attached to it. As an exercise in making judgments, in the chart opposite, I gave my own guess at the odds that various aspects of the Big Bang picture presented in this chapter are correct. And of course, he gave a chart here. I'm sorry for the low font, and it's not very clear, but I'm just showing it was there. And he did go on to write this chapter, The 5 Reasons Galaxies Can't Exist. The 5 reasons why galaxies can't exist. And That's a provocative title. He obviously believes they exist, and that he was just saying, the problem of explaining the existence of galaxies has proved to be one of the thorniest in cosmology. By all rights, they shouldn't be there, yet there they sit. It's hard to convey the depth of frustration that this simple fact induces among scientists. I'm like, oh my God. Dear Lord, I didn't mean that irreverently. I began to think, well, maybe the galaxies were specially created. And James Trefil outlined, he tried to solve it with dark matter. Dark matter is now in question. It doesn't surprise me. I've had professors skeptical of this, and then later experiments like in 2019 showing that we can't find it. This really struck me. It just kind of reinforced my belief that the Big Bang is wrong. A professor at my undergrad alma mater, Sister Roy, came out against the Big Bang 20 years ago, and he's now been published in a prestigious journal in astronomy, astrophysics, critical of the Big Bang. It's starting to become slightly fashionable to now be critical of the Big Bang. There are numerous problems in their models, and I saw this coming. And in addition to galaxy evolution, there's the problem of solar system evolution. As I read this book that was meant to counter, it was actually meant to counter creationism. He had written, I think, Stuart Ross Taylor. It's an old book, but he was sounding the alarm. He said, "Of this way leaves the way, we all tend. This leaves the way open for salesmen of simplistic solutions to purport to explain everything in terms of a young child could follow. Of these, creationism in its various incarnations represents the most serious threat." So I said, okay, I'll read this book that is obviously anti-creationist. At the end of reading that book, when he described all the problems with their models, I said, solar system looks like it's created. It doesn't look like it could evolve. If you have matter out there and it's gravitationally attracted, it would just clump together into a ball. You're not going to have, it's difficult to get it to be having rotating disks. Where does it get its angular momentum? So you can come up with theories of that. But getting the disks then to form planets is especially difficult. And then also the particular different orbital planes. And then there's problems with angular momentum. Just like this is a total mess. I'm more willing to accept special creation. When I went to grad school, studied cosmology. Do I have my book here from cosmology? Let's see if I have it here. I'll have to put it up on my shelf sometime. It talked about the inflation model where things are being moved apart at speeds faster than the speed of light by factors of 1,000 million, or who knows what number. The number keeps changing. And then this was so distasteful to some cosmologists and physicists that they started invoking variable speed of light. And ironically, a variable speed of light could also solve the problem of distant starlight of young Earth creationism. And like, holy smokes, everything's on the table now. It's a level playing field. Young Earth creationism doesn't sound any more outrageous than any other of the mainstream theories. They maybe get window dressing of respectability, but when you actually study these things in detail, my jaws just started to drop. I said, how can you believe this? At the very least, even if you're right, it's really premature to declare that it's correct. And that was a suspicion that Dave Raup had. So that's not proof of young Earth creationism, but I'm saying that the trend in my personal life, this came from being absolutely impossible to now feasible. So now I'll cover a little bit about some of the stuff with radiometric dating. So I'd say there are numerous problems with young Earth creation models. So I'll just admit that, but I believe it. And, people will say, well, how can you believe it? You don't have all the facts. I'll say, well, people believe in evolutionary theory, in eukaryotic evolution, and they also believe in abiogenesis. They don't have all the facts for sure. And there are problems with abiogenesis theory, so much so that they're now in some scientists in prestigious publications like Nature and also Proceedings in National Academy of Science are invoking multiple universes. I said that's pretty much indistinguishable from invoking miracles at that point. And I've argued vociferously that eukaryotic evolution is really, you would need miracles of God to make it feasible. It has similar comparable statistics to the problem of abiogenesis. So even if we assume universal common ancestry, I think you need miracles. Of course, those are my opinions, but I'm quite eager to defend those viewpoints and say that I think the young Earth creationists in those fields of abiogenesis, of eukaryotic evolution, are on good grounds to say you need miracles of God. On the other hand, the problem of the age of the Earth, the age of the fossil record, great radiometric dating, and distant starlight, those are very big problems for the model. We don't have solutions. And evidence of that is not even all the young Earth creationists agree. The main reason for that is we'll agree that the emergence of life and complexity are miracles, but the explanations of Noah's flood, distant starlight, and radiometric dating, we're not appealing to miracles by and large. We're trying to explain it through natural processes. That makes the problem a lot bigger, a lot bigger. And some people will still say, why don't you throw miracles in there? So, for like Noah's flood. And I'd say as far as the ark and Noah himself and taking care of all those animals in a big ark, I think you definitely needed a miracle. I think Bill Nye made a good point of saying, okay, this would be a logistical nightmare. And I had to agree with him. I said, I think this is the one case I would invoke a miracle of God. But outside of trying to invoke miracles to, to bolster belief in the Bible, that can lead to circular reasoning. You look at the Bible and say, oh, there just needs to be a miracle there that fixes it. That tends to be circular reasoning. So I don't use that as a defense of the Bible. When I try to invoke miracles, it's like what I call miracles as a matter of principle. When even an atheist like Fred Hoyle or Francis Crick will say this, Francis Crick used the phrase that an honest man would have to admit this looks like a miracle. Now, Crick went on to say the reasons he didn't think it was. But just suffice to say, even superficially, it looks like a miracle. To Fred Hoyle, he likened it, the origin of life, to be like a tornado passing through a junkyard assembling a 747. And even though some people have said that's a terrible analogy, I think for the origin of life, it is a very good analogy, a very good metaphor. And anyone who's watched the James Tour, the 13-part series, 10-hour lecture on abiogenesis, you'll see that point kind of hammered home really hard in terms of the disorganizing properties of the chemicals involved in abiogenesis. So that being said, I'm freely acknowledging the problems with radiometric dating. But what changed my mind on this? I did a graduate school term paper, to save my grade in a solid state physics class. Among my peers, we would alternate who would be at the top or bottom. So some classes I would be on the top of the class, other classes I'd be at the bottom. And in solid state physics, I was at the bottom. And I said, okay, I'm going to roll the dice here and just gamble. I'm going to pick the outrageous topic of chemical and electrical means of changing nuclear structure. I said, the professor will either love this term paper or he'll give me an F. we all had to write the term papers, and we were given about 10 minutes time to make a presentation at the last class to each of our peers. And after I gave my presentation, the professor, Dr. Charles, was very enthusiastic. He said that was the topic of the night. I described how electricity could change nuclear structure. This was in 2012 or so, and I only had a couple data points that I was able to pull together from peer-reviewed secular sources, not creationist resources. And there are two experiments and observations that I appealed to, that lightning strikes could create neutrons. This was in the mid-'80s. The mechanism of how this was accomplished is still somewhat debated, but we have better ideas of what it involves, and it's not fusion. It's a different process that we call photonuclear processes, where electricity creates gamma rays, and the gamma rays can then disintegrate nuclei. That means we can change, there's at least now the possibility we could change the proportion of parent isotopes and daughter isotopes without accelerated nuclear decay. It could be accomplished, at least in principle, through electrical means. A purely secular reason that this is of interest, there is 70 times more uranium on the continental shelves than in the seafloor and supposedly the mantle. If this is the case, purely on these terms, we might be looking for an explanation why we have 70 times more. Could it be that the tectonic activity related to a cataclysm, like say Noah's flood, all the compression could create the uranium and the various daughter products, etc. And this is an interesting question. So we have to combine a lot of different fields here to at least try to say young Earth creationism has at least a fighting chance. We have data points now we didn't have, namely one, the photonuclear process. So a lot of nuclear processes were assumed to be fission and fusion and radioactive decay, the main ways to change nuclear structure. But now we add photonuclear processes. It's a different game now. It's starting to change. And I'll add to that the possibility of lattice-enabled nuclear reactions. And I covered this last time. I'll cover it again, and then I'll add a little bit more. So, and I'm going to skip this. The other thing I'll just mention in passing, the other thing that caught my attention is the chemical dates don't line up with the supposed geological ages. The fact that we have peptide bonds in the proteins, the absence of racemization, the oxidation, any number of things. And it can't be attributed to contamination. There are various reasons for this. We'll go into that maybe in other shows. But the chemical dates don't line up. We have the faint young sun paradox, which people claim that it's been solved, and a careful scrutiny of the literature will show it's not solved. Even those who claim solutions, they can't all be right, because all of them claim to have solved the problem, and then they'll criticize the other models. They all can't be right. There are all these models that claim to solve the problem, which means it's not solved. It's like when I had 25 contractors trying to work on my house, giving me 25 different explanations for the leak in my basement. I said, you all can't be right. All right. So faint young sun paradox, the problem of the magnetic fields in the Earth. The chemical problems, the chemical dates, the problem of erosion. I said, okay, the soft dinosaur tissue, for example, these are all telling me, okay, at the very least, this deserves a major timeout. At the very least, okay, if you're not quite eager to say the Earth is young, we could say, okay, we've not proven that it's old either, or definitely not the fossil record, because the fossils look young. I mean, they do. And the fossilization process had to be rapid, not over millions of years. So, okay, so notwithstanding all the other problems with young Earth creationism, I said there's a lot of other problems. There are conversely a lot of problems with the mainstream models. And honesty on both sides will say, okay, we've not resolved everything. It's like, okay, if that's the case, some of this is accepted on faith, which would be, I think, the more honest thing to say, rather than either side saying, oh, we have definite proof. Okay. So I will say some of this is accepted on faith. Some of it does have physical evidence that would at least inspire some faith. So this is from a purely, evidential standpoint, not theological. So now let me go to some of the experiments here. We did a show on racemization dating. Even though the rate of racemization can vary by 60 times, even when you slowed it down by a factor of 60, it would not explain the chemical dates we're finding. It would suggest life is very young because we found homochiral chemicals even in the Cambrian fossils. I don't have time to cover that here. So this Sunday I talked about low energy nuclear reactions, high energy, low energy, and mixed energy. I talked about fission and fusion in the thermonuclear weapons, primary ways of changing nuclear structure in addition to radioactive decay. But then we have this photonuclear process that's been accepted only in the last 10 years, within the last 10 years. This is a big development. Experiments, I said I cited pyro-electric fusion. You can look up the Wikipedia entry on pyro-electric fusion. It's able to take place at minus 36, minus 34 degrees Celsius. The idea is, I call it a mixed energy nuclear reaction, where the substrate is cold, but then you're firing like a bullet into it at high energy. So you have part of the system that is cold, but then you have very focused energy in some parts. You can create a fusion reaction at minus 34 degrees. This is, you can, depending on the semantics, you can call it a cold fusion reaction. In the sense, part of the system is cold, but the other part is hot. That being said, we do have confirmation of that's the device, by the way, that creates pyroelectric fusion. You can see the little needle here that focuses the energy. The mechanism is you take heat, you put it into the crystals, it creates electricity, and then it's able to make these 100 kilo electron volt deuterium nuclei, and you're able to cause fusion that way. Let's see. There are other forms of fusion. You can look at this. There is a Wikipedia entry called muon-catalyzed fusion. Muon-catalyzed fusion. This is an accepted mechanism of cold fusion. You take negative muons, you're able to use them to reduce the Coulomb barrier. You're able to carry out fusion at low temperatures. Unfortunately, there's no way to, at this time, to use muon-catalyzed fusion to make a self-generating nuclear reactor. You actually have to put a lot more energy into the system than you're able to get out of the fusion reaction. But this is well accepted muon-catalyzed fusion as a real mechanism. Unfortunately, because of problems with the Pons and Fleischmann experiment that claimed cold fusion got a very bad rap. Even just the name is associated with crank science. But this is highly unfair to the scientists that actually achieved it and that were accepted by the mainstream. They just didn't use the term cold fusion. They used the term like muon-catalyzed fusion, which was actually cold fusion. One of the researchers, Stephen Jones, who pioneered muon-catalyzed fusion, also went on to talk about condensed matter fusion. In some of these, there was an experiment recently called piezoelectric. Piezoelectric. Oh boy, I'm having a problem here again. One moment. All right. Piezoelectric neutron generation. This also, it's a neutron generator. Piezoelectricity is where, this is kind of funny. When you compress a rock, a certain kind of rock, like in your butane lighters, where you press the trigger, you're compressing, I think, quartz. It generates electricity. That electricity in the system, they're using piezoelectricity. They used it to create high energy gamma rays. The gamma rays could then be used to generate neutrons, something like that. There's a paper. I promised I'd put links to this, but you can find it. Piezo. It's in the IEEE. Let me see if I could even bring up the paper in the meantime. See if I have it here. I hope I have it. Nope, I don't have it handy with me. I'll put the link in the video description. But why this is funny, I mean, just think about hammering rocks. You're creating piezoelectricity. Coupled with other mechanisms, at least, and this is a huge exaggeration, okay? Don't take it too literally. But hammering rocks to make neutrons is just kind of funny, the idea. Now, in this experiment conducted by IEEE members, IEEE is Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers. I was a member of the IEEE myself until I decided I didn't want to keep paying the dues since my employer wouldn't cover it. So this is the most prestigious organization for electrical engineers. And I, back in my electrical engineering days, before I went into biology and physics, but they're able to use piezoelectric mechanisms to generate neutrons. Now, if you think about it, when there are earthquakes, you could have a piezoelectric effect. This Sunday, I covered how earthquake lights are now being studied by the American Physical Society, the premier society of physicists in the United States. And there's been the phenomenon that when we have earthquakes, we have these strange lights occurring. People have attributed this to UFOs or apparitions of the Virgin Mary or whatever. They're now thinking that these apparitions are actually either they're electrically induced lights or lightning. And it's caused by the tectonic activity related to the earthquake. Now, there are two mechanisms, at least there are multiple mechanisms of generating electric charges. One is triboelectric effect. And all of us have personally experienced this on a cold, very dry day. There's lots of static electricity. You touch doorknobs, you can see a static discharge. That's because, when you're rubbing materials against each other, it can develop static charges, and then you get a static discharge. On airplanes, I believe that's also the triboelectric effect. As it's flying through the air, it's creating static charges. That's why you have these static discharge antennas at the tails of the airplane to dump that off. So we don't know what's causing the earthquake lights. It could be the piezoelectric effect or the triboelectric effect. The thing is they are up, if they're generating lightning bolts, which are on the order of hundreds of millions of volts, you're able to generate then electrons or other particles that are in the mega electron volt range. That is capable of change. That level of energy is capable of changing nuclear structure. Now it's a matter of elucidating the mechanism. I will probably give a talk sometime on kind of the mechanics of this, kind of the terminology. You'll hear the word watts, amperes, joules, volts. etc. Just informally, volts, when we say volts, that is the measure of the quality of the energy. More volts means more quality. The more amperes means more quantity. So when you have an electrostatic discharge on a cold winter day, when you touch a knob like that one here, some studies have said, some documents I've read have said that it could be on the order of 30,000 volts. That means you have a high quality of energy there, meaning the electrons are moving at high velocity. 30,000 volts, the shock is 30,000 volts, but the reason it doesn't kill you is there's not a large quantity of electrons. Quantity of electrons is measured in terms of coulombs, and coulombs per second is amperes. So when you hear about amperes, that's the number of coulombs per second being transmitted. If this were moving at, if that discharge, when you touch the knob, like say the knob there, were on the order of amperes, you'd probably be incinerated. It's probably on the order of micro, nano amperes, something like that. So even though it's 30,000 volts, it doesn't have a lot of punch to it. So the volts give a kind of the quality. So when you hear the word, okay, so now let's say, okay, so you have like a 9-volt battery. That means there's a potential difference. It relates to potential energy. It's a little more subtle than that. But just imagine that you have 2 plates in a vacuum, and you connect the battery to it, say your 9-volt battery, and you have a free electron moving between the plates, from one plate to another. When it goes through a potential difference of, say, 9 volts, it will acquire an energy of 9 electron volts. It's actually a nice, simple calculation. So when you have basically a lightning bolt that is generating 100 million volt, that's at 100 million volts, a free electron, hypothetically, in principle, could acquire energies of 100 million electron volts. That's a lot of that relates to its speed. It's very, very high. It's very high speed at that point. That's really kind of the measure of its energy, and also a way to infer the velocity of the electron. So that's just a little bit of the physics. So when you hear me throwing out terms like electron volts, it relates to its energy, its kinetic energy. The classical definition being 1/2 mv squared, 1/2 mass times velocity squared. It needs a relativistic correction at some point when you have really fast ones, but it really it describes its velocity and or energy, and so you'll just hear those terms. Photons also have an energy based on quantum mechanics. The famous, it's called the Planck-Einstein relation. See, energy equals h times wavelength, where h is Planck's constant. Sorry, I'm throwing all this out there, but just to give you an idea, your light bulb is throwing photons at you on the order of maybe the energies of 1 electron volt, less than 10, greater than 1. Your X-rays are in the range of 30 electron volts. 30 electron volts is enough energy to cause fusion reactions. I know that may sound outrageous. Usually you want way more than that, just to make sure you're way over the threshold, and there are probabilities associated with that when you have very high energy. But definitely when you get up into the million electron volt energies, you can create changes in nuclear structure. So this is all very favorable to young Earth creationism, and I will close out by talking about a few other experiments, and particularly the ones that happened in Ukraine. Sadly, the laboratory where this happened is in Kiev, Ukraine. And I've been searching the website for the papers that the scientists in Ukraine had worked on, and the website is dead. I fear the worst, and I've had to get the documents. But what they discovered basically is that when you throw lots of electricity, focused electrical energy on things like copper or even cobalt, you'll change the nuclear structure. You'll get distributions of isotopes that are very similar to background, which means they look old. If you assumed that the nuclear structure came about through nuclear decay, you would assume that it's old. But this naturally will happen when you fire focused electrons at a particular energy, and I don't have the number of electron volts involved off the top of my head. But when you do that, you can take copper, turn it in parts of the copper into uranium or any other daughter products of uranium. You'll get proportions. This is actually then heartening because Andrew Snelling and others, and I know that Dapper Dino has had issues with Andrew Snelling, but they have sent off lab samples of rocks that were considered old to laboratories and got results back. They did confirm that it looked old based on 3 different radiometric dates. Unfortunately for the older viewpoint, the radiometric dates didn't agree. You could say that they're old kind of in broad terms, but it should be disconcerting that they were off by billions of years, each of the independent methods. The experiments at Ukraine Proton 21 laboratory that I just mentioned, it was conducted by someone named Adamenko. The Proton 21 laboratory was able to establish that you can make all these proportions of isotopes by bombarding certain elements. You can create different isotopes depending on what element you bombarded. Their principal targets were cobalt and copper. And it'd be interesting to see them do this stuff with iron or whatever. The point is now there may be an avenue that the young Earth creationists can invoke for some of the long-term radiometric dates, also the absence of intermediate radioisotopes. If we assume that most of the isotopes were not radioactive until Noah's flood, and that the tectonic activity created enough electricity to create these focused electrons that can create these distributions of isotope, this would be favorable to young Earth creationism. It would also explain the anomaly of having 70 times more uranium on the continental shells than we do on the mantle. So, and by the way, really, how we get uranium at all, not to mention how the planet Earth evolved in the first place, is very problematic for the mainstream. And as I said, it's because of the mainstream literature. When I studied it, I started to lean toward young Earth creationism because, I tried to give a fair hearing. And every time I would read stuff like that in books like this about the problems of solar system evolution and the origin of elements, I just like, whoa, time out. This isn't as a done deal, as much as a done deal as it's been represented in the popular press and even many of my textbooks. This is still not well understood or characterized. We don't even really quite know for sure how nucleosynthesis of all these heavy elements comes about. We have some guesses, but we have some evidence that it might be generated this way. But we may have more evidence here earthbound with Adamenko's Proton 21 laboratory experiments than we do about stars that we can't even touch or feel or experiment with. So sadly, Ukraine, the Kiev, has, it's being run over by the Russians. But there's always a chance to replicate these experiments. And I'll put it in the video description. We have now this lattice-enabled nuclear reactions that's run by NASA, the NASA Research Center. I think it's the Ames Research Center in Ohio. And I'll put a link to that. You can read it. 2020. This is a very recent development where they took electricity. They created gamma rays with the electricity. The gamma rays then made neutrons. They used the neutrons to collide with deuterium nuclei. The deuterium nuclei would then fly into a metal lattice, solid state metal that happened to have other deuterium in it, and they were able to create fusion reactions, which is a transmutation. So, I was skeptical of the work in Ukraine until I saw this, until I saw that the lattice-enabled reactions happening at the Ames Research Center of NASA. Why is NASA interested in this? They're interested in finding ways to make nuclear-powered aircraft, nuclear-powered spaceships. And this was a big step forward. So this is now combining numerous mechanisms of photonuclear processes and fusion. It's using electricity. It's creating photons of high energy, making neutrons, getting them to collide with nuclei and getting the nuclei to fuse. It's a long reaction chain. There are many steps in this process, but it gives hope that we can now, the young Earth creationists can now maybe have an out to solve their problems of radiometric dating, particularly the long-term radioisotopes and their supposed daughter products. So I'll close by just reading some stuff from Adamenko's paper. Let me just stop sharing on one computer. I'll start sharing on another. Just if you'll indulge me for one moment here. This is kind of hard to set up on this particular computer. Let's see if I get the right one here. All right. This paper happened to be floating around. Thank God here in the United States, someone was able to archive one of the papers from the Ukraine Proton 21 laboratory. As I said, I've been trying to access the website in Kiev in the Ukraine. It's dead, and I think we all know why it might be, and it's really sad news. Great scientific work is being run over by forces. Let me just take a minute here to pause. I'm going to just wax a little theological here briefly, if you'll indulge me. It says in the book of Proverbs, it's the glory of God to conceal a matter. It's the glory of kings to search out a matter. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. It is the glory of kings to search out the matter. That is, that God hides evidences for us to discover. It's God's policy to be hidden, obviously. If he were as evident to the human senses as the air we breathe, we probably wouldn't be having these arguments over the existence of God, the question of creation, etc. He would appear to us in human form with great power and authority and just tell us straight, and he'd settle the question. But he's chosen to hide things. It says in Proverbs, it's the glory of God to conceal a matter. The glory of kings is to search it out. It is a glorious thing for us to discover. It is a glorious thing that God has concealed it to kind of surprise us. And so we are having to dig. And yeah, it's in God's will that great scientific work like the work in Ukraine is temporarily on hold because of world events. But I think God is testing to see how bad humanity wants to learn about his creation. That's a personal theological opinion, of course. So, some atheists rightly will object and say, why doesn't God just appear? And I'll say, well, maybe he's toying with you. He's trying to see how badly you want to find out whether he exists or not. And then beyond that, whether he is involved in the creation, the details of creation, just beyond his existence. So to me, young earth creationism is not a necessary condition for the Christian faith, but I'd say it's a pretty much sufficient condition. If we're able to empirically demonstrate that the case for young earth creationism is true for a lot of people who are on the fence, that would be adequate evidence for them that the Christian faith is true. but God does conceal a lot of it, and we have to dig very hard to find out. So that being said, now let me go to this paper that we're very privileged to still have. So this is from the Proton 21 laboratory in Ukraine. And let me see if I can get this a little bigger. I'll put links to this so you can grab it. So this was done 18 years ago in Kiev. And I'll show you the apparatus. Here they have like a copper target, and they're going to bombard it with lots of electrons. Let me see if I can find out the energy of the electrons here. Okay, they take a kilojoule of energy to a solid target. Unfortunately, that doesn't tell us the individual energy of the electrons, but a kilojoule of energy is a lot. So just to give an idea, a kilojoule of energy over 1 second is 1 kilowatt. So that'd be like running a heater, a space heater for like 1 second. So 1 kilojoule of energy. But if you do it in a very short time, boy, the wattage is just incredible. So it's within the impulse duration on the order of 10 to the minus eighth. Minus eighth is like a tenth of a billion. So this is probably on the order of 1 billion watts, just briefly. 1 billion watts. It's a pretty hefty pulse. And they would hit a copper target, and there you have it, with this beam of energy, and they would get all these elements coming out afterward. Now, to be fair, we have to be cautious with these claims. The Sandia National Laboratory here in the United States did criticize the claims and said it could be impurities. And just in the interest of transparency, I don't think we can rule that out, that there might have been some impurities in the copper that are just being detected here. But I'll give some counters to that as I continue with this paper. So, there's the first time, 0.36 kilo electron volts. Okay, that's the first time I saw. Okay, this is enough to cause fusion. And so they generated all these elements here, and they're able to count the number of elements all the way up to lead. In further papers, they're able to get uranium, depending on what the target was. The interesting thing is they are running this on cobalt. So they would have a setup here where they would take a cobalt as the target. So on the left there you have copper now, but just imagine that there's cobalt. When they did this experiment on cobalt, they're able to change the amount of radioactivity. That means they remediated, they accelerated the decay. They changed the cobalt to something else. I hesitate to use the word accelerated decay, but you effectively decayed it out to something tamer. We don't know how come it didn't have some other side effects, but this is one example we actually, quote unquote, effectively decayed it out just by throwing lots of electrons at it. And again, the tectonic activity can generate huge amounts of electricity at the levels we're talking about here. And you could take even radioactive isotopes and degrade them to something more benign. And that would mean you may or may not have daughter products. That's also the other thing. I don't know what the proportion of daughter products is generated through this process. These are all questions that need to be explored. But when you can change, okay, so you have these, I guess, these radiation counters. I don't know if a Geiger counter can detect gamma rays. The cobalt-60 generates gamma rays, a certain level of gamma rays per second, radioactive decay. After they bombarded it with electrons like this, the amount of radiation was decreased. That indicates that we've remediated it through electrical means. And they've done, so I just welcome people to read this paper. I'll provide links to getting it. They're suggesting here photonuclear processes and who knows what else. They haven't elucidated all the mechanisms. So one thing I'm going to suggest, and this was discovered in muon-catalyzed fusion, and I'm just going to cover this briefly. In let me kill this slide here. I'm going to bring up another. Usually in the fusion process or transmutation process, you have something called the Coulomb barrier. When you have two positive charges trying to be brought together, they'll tend to repel each other, analogous to two north magnets. When you try to take two magnets that have the same pole and push them together, it'll oppose that. Well, definitely at the molecular level, by way of analogy, metaphor, if you take two nuclei that are positively charged and try to bring them together, you need a lot of force to push them together. Or conversely, you'd have to have a lot of initial velocity between the two of them so that they're coming together and colliding at high enough velocity. They're colliding at high enough velocity that they'll overcome the resistance from the positive charges on both nuclei to enable them to bind together. So just like you can take two north magnets and just force them together, you can kind of do the same with the nuclei that have two positive charges. One way around that is to get a negative charge into the nucleus. And that can be done with muons. And then there's some stuff with quantum mechanics where even the electron overlaps the nucleus occasionally. And that's quantum mechanical. So just suffice to say, when you can get a situation where you have a negative charge in the nucleus, you can neutralize it, overcome the Coulomb forces, and you can get nuclear transmutation. And there have been various theories on how this can be achieved. They're controversial, and I think some of the criticisms among the scientists are pointed, and I think theories need to be revised and improved in our understanding there. That's how science works. The theories for these low energy nuclear reactions are not being put forward by creationists. They're being put forward by secular scientists just interested in nuclear physics. They are getting mainstream recognition slowly, and I think that this will be a potential out for the young Earth creationist. Yes, it's a promissory note, but if we're going to be fair in applying standards, there are plenty of promissory notes in abiogenesis, and there are plenty of promissory notes in abiogenesis, and they're getting piled higher and deeper because the problems are getting greater. Whereas I think with the problem of young Earth creationism, slowly the models are improving, and so is the data, and we're having less promissory notes over time. And I think the trend is favorable. So we'll cover that we'll cover that in future topics. Now, I sense some things going on in the side chat. When I'm focused on a topic, I can't moderate it. But guys, I just encourage I would ask you to be very kind to BENT Hovind on this channel. I consider him a friend and colleague, and I just encourage people to get along. He doesn't, he said that if we could make a better case for young earth creationism, he's certainly open to that, and I respect that, I accept that, and believe that. And so, having a hostile climate here is not helpful to getting former young earth creationists who are still professing Christians to listen. I will say one thing though, as far as I know, they haven't, they get the weekly lampoon of Kent Hovind and other people on Dapper Dino's channel. To my knowledge, I haven't been lampooned, and I hope I never will be on Dapper Dino's channel. I hope the quality of the science I put forward here is better, and I would hope everyone would consider. So with that, I would I'm going to close the show. Let's be all in prayer for the world events. It looks pretty scary out there. Not just the Ukraine-Russia stuff, but there's the China-Taiwan. There's wars and rumors of wars coming forward. There's famines and pestilence. There's, you look at Venezuela, that went from being one of the most prosperous countries in the world, only within a lifetime, it just went to pot because of tyrannical leaders, communism. It's happening in the United States. We're having very corrupt politicians doing stupid things and evil things. It's ruining our country. And the United States is one of the last bastions of the free world. My heart sinks when I look at the culture, and I think, oh Lord, be with, return soon. I don't know how long we could last at this rate, and we're not going to. The Bible prophesies it, and since I'm a classical millennialist rather than a pre-tribber, it does turn my stomach more than someone who's a pre-trib rapturist. I fear, and there are few of us Christians that feel we're going to suffer with everyone else through the tribulation and the era of the Antichrist. And I'm praying that maybe God will forbear a little bit longer, like in the era of Josiah, and that maybe in our lifetime we won't see all this evil. But it's sickening. So that being said, we have all the more reason to be praying for each other, to be praying for God's comfort and courage to face each day, and to be of service to Him. So I haven't had a chance to monitor the side chat and say hi to everyone. I really want to. I want to express my thanks for everyone who's joined us this evening, both live and in recording. I want to give special thanks to BENT Hovind, who joined us pretty much on the fly, since John B., our expected guest, is very sick. And I'd like to thank everyone. Have a good night till we meet each other again, Lord willing. God bless you.